two big names announced today they're not running for president next year. Hillary Clinton and Michael Bloomberg. In announcing his decision today, Bloomberg issued a warning to Democrats. He wrote, "It's essential that we nominate a Democrat who will be in the strongest position to defeat Donald Trump and bring our country back together. We cannot allow the primary process to drag the party to an extreme that would diminish our chances in the general election." Right now, a dozen Democrats are in the race. Yesterday, former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper became the latest to join what's expected to be the largest Democratic field ever. With so much at stake, the candidates now begin the task of convincing voters that they can win the left-leaning primaries, of course, like Iowa, and the more centrist general election coming in November next year. For more, I'm joined by Christina Bellantoni, professor of journalism at USC Annenberg, and former assistant managing editor of the Los Angeles Times. Bob Shrum, of course, is longtime Democratic strategist and director of the Center for the Political Future at USC. John, I'll start with you. Christina, most people in conversation now think about the election. Do we want to go with an ideologue, or are we going to go with somebody who could have a better chance of winning? Is that a legitimate distinction? An ideologue, well, of course, Senator Sanders is a socialist, happy to be on the left, strong core. Is he a better bet in the party than somebody who's a moderate and might appeal to those people who've been questioning whether they go back to Trump a second time?
I mean, it's the heart versus mind, right? This is the big debate, really, that Democrats have that I think Republicans just don't have the same debate. And when you see...
They don't have a heart, they don't have a mind.
You have that huge field of candidates with, every type of person from every type of place. Is there really a too liberal in that? You know that no matter who the candidate is, the president is going to paint them as a socialist, gun.
Well, he won't have to do it in one case.
Things, right?
Well, in one case, he won't have to do it. Because Bernie will throw it right back at him. He says, I am a socialist, and you're a capitalist bad guy.
It could be, sure. But no matter who it is. So in that sense, the fighting over who's a little bit more left or who's a little bit more moderate, I don't really think that's the debate people are having. I think that Democrats are shell-shocked and terrified that Trump will win re-election.
You and I have been through two cases where a party went to its heart. Goldwater, in your heart, you know it's right. Yeah, he's right. And, of course, McGovern, we went through that. I was at the Democratic Convention in 72 as a volunteer for the DNC, and people were giddy with happiness. It wasn't like they were committing suicide. They loved picking McGovern.
So was I. I was McGovern's speechwriter, so I couldn't be anything but happy. Look, that was probably an unwinnable election, no matter who the Democrats nominated, after the Eagleton debacle, when McGovern picked somebody who was a flawed vice president.
Would a moderate have done better, like Muskie? Would he have done better?
He wouldn't have won the election. And I think it's to McGovern's credit that he stood up against the Vietnam War, told the truth about Watergate. I think there's a bit of a parlor game going on here about, are we going to pick someone? Democrats are very pragmatic in these primaries. If you look back at history, I think that overwhelmingly people are going to say, who has the best chance to beat Trump?
Polls show they want that to be the choice.
They want
the winner. They want a winner.
They want to beat Trump, number one. Number two, someone like Biden is feared tremendously by the Trump people in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan. If he gets there. But once again, it goes back to the nature of the electorate. It goes back to what Rob Reiner was saying, or in your last segment, you guys were talking about this. Yeah. In 2004, it was date Dean, marry Kerry. People thought Kerry had a chance to win. They didn't think Dean had a chance to win. And that was Iowa, and then New Hampshire. So I think
Anyway, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is ruling out another run for president. I thought she already did, but she did so in an interview recently, in fact, today, with News 12's Tara Rosenblum in New York. Let's watch.
I'm not running, but I'm going to keep working and speaking and standing up for what I believe. I want to be sure that people understand I'm going to keep speaking out. I'm not going anywhere. What's at stake in our country, the kinds of things that are happening right now, are deeply troubling to me.
Well, it's not the first time Secretary Clinton has said she's not interested this time, but this time appears to be definitive. President Trump couldn't resist, of course, tweeting, "Crooked Hillary Clinton confirms she will not run in 2020, rules out a third bid for White House. Aw, shucks. Does that mean I won't get to run against her again? She will be sorely missed." Sarcastic guy, isn't he? President Trump has made a habit of going after the Secretary of State. Let's watch him. He can't get off it.
Hillary is the one who broke the law over and over and over again. We can be sure that what is in those emails is absolutely devastating. If Hillary Clinton were to be elected, it would create an unprecedented and protracted constitutional crisis. Oh, I hope Hillary Is she going to run? I hope. Hillary, please run again. Oh, these resistors resist. Hillary resisted, and you know what happened? She lost the election in a landslide.
But Hillary Clinton had the last word for now when she tweeted this graphic from the film Mean Girls with the character asking, "Why are you so obsessed with me?" And my question is, remember during the debate when Trump, like this gorilla, leaned over the back of her and hovered over the back of her? He's still hovering over Hillary Clinton.
Sure, well, he does it because it works. This is about the base, the base, the base, the base, the base. And when you talk to voters that are still with Trump and that ceiling of whatever, it's 38 to 42%.
Well, it's 88% of the Republican Party.
Right, exactly. Then they want to say the same thing. They're still talking about the emails. They're still talking about, Bill and what he did, or they want to talk about Whitewater even. You see this happening on the internet. And no matter what the candidate ends up being or who the candidate ends up being in 2020, of course he's going to talk about Hillary Clinton. He will tie that person to Hillary Clinton.
I can only say from where I grew up,
research all of it.
The area around Philadelphia, the suburbs that seem to defy all these elections, Biden right now going in. I don't know what's going to happen the next couple of months. Going in, Biden going in, Amy Klobuchar, that kind of a ticket would swim to victory around 75% in the burbs around Philadelphia. You know they decide everything. Bob, I got to go.
Go.
Christina Bellantoni, thank you.
Go.
All right, what was your last thought? You got to.
No, I was going to say, look, Trump can't win with 42% unless he has a third-party candidate who inadvertently benefits him. It's impossible to draw it in an inside straight a second time.
I don't know nothing. Sergeant Schultz, listen up. Anyway, Christina Bellantoni.
364 days from now, California primary.
I know. And by the way, you can start voting in California like now, about a month ago next year. Thank you, Christina Bellantoni and Bob Strum.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.